In the shadowed heart of Westeros, where the wind howls with the cries of forgotten kings, a tale burns through the ages, a saga of fire and blood, of love forged in ice, and of vengeance that could unravel the tapestry of the world. Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, rose from the ashes of exile to challenge empires, her name a beacon of hope and a harbinger of ruin. Her fall was a tragedy that shook the heavens, her heart pierced by the man she loved. Yet whispers persist that her story did not end in death. What if in the embers of her sacrifice a child was born, a son of fire and ice, nursed on hatred, destined to avenge his mother and awaken a darkness older than the gods? This is the epic of Daenerys, her doomed love with Jon Snow and the wrath of their son Aegon, whose vengeance may herald a shadow no mortal can escape. Step into this tale where every choice is a wound, every victory a prelude to doom, and the line between hero and monster blurs in the flicker of dragonfire. In the sun-drenched city of Pentos, where the air shimmered with the scent of spice and the promise of secrets, a young girl stood at the edge of her destiny. Daenerys Targaryen, barely 13, was the last true-born daughter of House Targaryen, a dynasty that had ruled Westeros for 3 centuries with fire and blood. Her silver hair cascaded like moonlight over her shoulders, and her violet eyes, wide with a mix of fear and defiance, betrayed the weight of her lineage. Exiled after Robert Baratheon's rebellion toppled her father, the Mad King Aerys II, Daenerys had known only flight her childhood, a blur of strange cities and whispered threats. Westeros, the land of her birth, was a dream spun by her brother Viserys, a man whose ambition burned brighter than his reason. Viserys at 20 was a pale shadow of the dragon he claimed to be. His gaunt face and fevered eyes spoke of a man consumed by the loss of his crown. He called himself the rightful king, though he wore no throne and commanded no army. To him, Daenerys was a tool, a bargaining chip to reclaim the Iron Throne. In Pentos, under the opulent roof of Magister Illyrio, Merpatis Viserys struck a deal that would alter Daenerys' life forever. He promised her hand to Khal Drogo, a Dothraki warlord whose khalasar of 40,000 riders thundered across the grasslands like a storm. In exchange, Drogo would lend his warriors to Viserys' cause, a pact sealed with Daenerys' future. She pleaded with her brother, her voice trembling in the candlelit chambers of Illyrio's manse. "I don't want to marry a savage," she whispered, her hands clutching the silken folds of her gown. Viserys' response was venomous, his fingers digging into her arm. "I would let his whole khalasar have you if it meant the Iron Throne. You will not wake the dragon girl." The wedding was a spectacle of savagery and splendor, held on a wind-swept plain outside Pentos. The Dothraki gathered in their thousands, their braids heavy with bells that chimed with every movement. Warriors clashed bronze araks in mock battles, their shouts mingling with the thunder of hooves. Daenerys, clad in a gown of pale silk that clung to her slender frame, stood before Drogo, a giant of a man with skin like burnished copper and a braid that trailed to his waist, a testament to his undefeated prowess. His dark eyes studied her, unreadable yet piercing, and Daenerys felt the weight of her future in his gaze. She stood tall, though her heart pounded like a war drum. Among the gifts piled high were 3 petrified dragon eggs, emerald, ruby, and onyx, presented by Illyrio with a knowing smile. Daenerys clutched them, drawn to their ancient warmth, their surfaces smooth as glass, yet pulsing with a life she could not name. Life with the khalasar was a trial by fire. Daenerys unused to the saddle rode until her thighs bled, her body aching under the relentless sun. The Dothraki were a people of motion, their lives tied to the rhythm of hooves and the call of the horizon. Drogo's tent, a cavern of firs and woven grasses, was a world apart, where Daenerys faced the raw intensity of his desire. At first she wept, her nights filled with the ache of submission, her days a blur of dust and exhaustion. Viserys trailed the khalasar like a petulant shadow, his complaints a constant thorn. "When will we march on Westeros?" he demanded, his voice shrill as he paced before Drogo's blood riders. The Dothraki ignored him, their loyalty to their Khaleesi growing with each day she endured. Yet Daenerys was no ordinary girl. Within her burned the blood of the dragon, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. She began to adapt her fear, giving way to resolve. She learned the Dothraki tongue, her words halting at first but growing steadier. She studied the ways of the khalasar, earning the respect of Drogo's blood riders, Rakaro, Jogo and Ago, with her quiet courage. One evening, as the khalasar camped beneath a canopy of stars, Drogo gifted her a silver mare, its coat gleaming like moonlight. Daenerys mounted it, her body sore but unyielding, and rode with a grace that silenced the warriors' doubts. The Dothraki cheered their voices, a tide of approval. Viserys, watching from the sidelines, sneered, but Daenerys felt a shift within her. She was no longer his to command. Nights in Drogo's tent became less a burden and more a bond. He called her moon of my life, his rough hands gentle as he traced her face. Daenerys, in turn, found strength in his devotion, her heart opening to the man who saw her, not as a pawn, but as a queen. She began to see her marriage not as a chain, but as a path to power. The dragon eggs placed near her sleeping furs seemed to hum with a warmth that matched her growing resolve. One night, as she gazed into their depths, she dreamed of fire and flight of a throne forged in flame. The khalasar moved onward, a river of hooves and steel, and Daenerys, with her eggs cradled close, felt the first stirrings of a destiny she could not yet name. She was a Targaryen, and the world would soon know her fire. Daenerys Targaryen's life with Khal Drogo was a crucible, forging her from a trembling girl into a queen in waiting. The Dothraki, khalasar, a sea of horses and warriors, swept across the grasslands of Essos, their tents a moving city under the endless sky. Daenerys rode at its heart, her silver mare a symbol of her growing power. Drogo, a storm of a man with eyes like obsidian, was fierce and unyielding, but his love for his Khaleesi was a fire that warmed her soul. He called her moon of my life, his voice a rumble that drowned out the ghosts of her past. When Daenerys learned she was pregnant, her heart soared, a fragile hope blooming amidst the dust and blood of the Dothraki way. The khalasar revered her pregnancy, their seers proclaiming her unborn son the stallion who mounts the world, destined to unite the tribes and conquer nations. Daenerys named him Rhaego, after her lost brother Rhaegar, and dreamed of a future where her son would ride at her side, a dragon in human form. She imagined him with Drogo's strength and her own fire, a prince who would reclaim the Iron Throne and restore House Targaryen to glory. The Dothraki warriors, once skeptical of their foreign Khaleesi, now bowed to her, their bells chiming in her honor. Even Viserys, trailing the khalasar like a vulture, could not deny her influence, though his resentment festered. "You're nothing without me," he spat one night, his wine-stained lips curling. Daenerys met his gaze, her voice steady. "I am the wife of the great Khal, and I carry his heir. You are nothing here." The khalasar's journey was relentless, a dance of hooves and steel across the plains. Daenerys, now accustomed to the saddle, rode with a grace that drew murmurs of awe. She learned the songs of the Dothraki, their tales of stars and spirits, and shared them around the campfires, her voice weaving a spell over the warriors. Her dragon eggs, carried in a carved chest, were never far from her side. At night she traced their surfaces, feeling a warmth that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She dreamed of dragons, their wings blotting out the sun, their roars shaking the earth. The dreams felt like memories, as if her blood remembered a time when Targaryens rode the skies. But fate is a cruel weaver, and Daenerys' joy was short-lived. During a raid on a Lazarene village, Drogo took a wound from a rival Khal's arak, a gash that festered under the sun. Daenerys, desperate to save him, turned to Miri, Mazdur, a magi captured in the slaughter. The witch, her eyes dark with secrets, promised to heal. Drogo with blood magic. Daenerys, clutching her swollen belly, agreed, ignoring the warnings of her blood riders. The ritual was a nightmare of shadows and screams conducted in a tent that reeked of death. Miri's chants filled the air, and the khalasar fled, fearing the dark forces at play. When it was over, Drogo lived, but his soul was gone. his body a husk that stared blankly at the sky. Daenerys's heart broke, but the true horror was yet to come. Her unborn son Rhaego paid the price for Miri's spell. Born dead, his body was a monstrous mockery, scaled and twisted, his life snuffed out by the Maegis' curse. Miri's words were a dagger to Daenerys' soul. You asked for life, you paid for life. When will he be as he was, when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves? Daenerys, trembling with grief, confronted the witch, her voice raw. You took my son and stars. Miri's smile was cold. I gave you what you asked for, Khaleesi. A life for a life. The Khalasar was fracturing the warriors, whispering of curses. Daenerys, her world in ruins, made a choice that would echo through history. She smothered Drogo, ending his half-life, her tears soaking his furs. Viserys, enraged by the Khalasar's refusal to march on. Westeros met his own end when he threatened Daenerys. One time too many. Drogo, stirred to wrath, poured molten gold over Viserys' head, fulfilling Daenerys' quiet command. He was no dragon, she whispered, as her brother's screams faded. Alone, she faced a crossroads. Her husband, her son, her brother, all were gone, yet the dragon eggs remained their warmth, a beacon in her darkness. Daenerys ordered a pyre built vast and towering on the plains where the Khalasar camped. She bound Miri to it, the witch's curses drowned by the crackle of kindling. The dragon eggs were placed among the flames, their surfaces gleaming like jewels. As the sun set, Daenerys spoke to her people, her voice carrying a strength she had not known she possessed. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, and I will take what is mine with fire and blood. She stepped into the inferno, the flames licking her skin, the heat a lover's embrace. The Dothraki watched awestruck as the fire consumed the night. When dawn broke, the pyre was ash, and Daenerys stood unscathed, her body kissed by fire but unburned. 3 dragons clung to her, Drogon black as midnight with eyes like molten gold. Rhaegal emerald scales glinting in the sun. Viserion cream and gold, his wings a whisper of silk. The Khalasar knelt, their voices a chorus of reverence. The unburnt, they called her, the mother of dragons. Daenerys, reborn in fire, felt the weight of her destiny settle upon her shoulders. She was no longer a pawn or a princess. She was a queen, and the world would tremble at her name. Daenerys Targaryen, now the mother of dragons, stood at the dawn of a new era. Her dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion, were small, their wings barely spanning her arms, but their eyes burned with a fierceness that mirrored her own, with a loyal remnant of Drogo's Khalasar and her dragon eggs, no longer mere relics. Daenerys set out to carve her legacy in Essos. Her first destination was Qarth, a city of opulence and deceit where she sought aid for her fledgling cause. The Qartheen, led by the enigmatic Xaro Shoan Daxos and the warlock Pyat Pri, welcomed her with honeyed words, their eyes fixed on her dragons. Daenerys, though young, sensed their greed, her instincts honed by betrayal. Qarth was a labyrinth of marble and intrigue, its gardens blooming with flowers that smelled of secrets. Xaro offered her wealth. Pyat Pri promised power, but Daenerys saw through their masks. In the House of the Undying, the warlocks tried to bind her, their visions, a maze of truths and lies. She saw glimpses of her past, her father's madness, Rhaegar's fall, and fragments of a future shrouded in snow and fire. Drogon, sensing her peril, burned the warlock's illusions, his flames a beacon that guided her out. Qarth taught her a lesson. Trust was a luxury she could ill afford, and her dragons were her true strength. Her true conquest began in Astapor, one of the slaver cities of Slaver's Bay. The good masters, cruel and arrogant, commanded an army of unsullied eunuch soldiers trained to perfection through unimaginable brutality. Daenerys, with only her dragons and a handful of followers, entered their plaza, her silver hair gleaming under the sun. The masters mocked her, a girl with no army, but Daenerys had a plan. She offered Drogon her fiercest dragon for 8,000 unsullied and their trainee boys. The masters, blinded by greed, accepted their laughter echoing through the plaza. But Daenerys was no fool. At the exchange, she handed over Drogon's chain, then turned to the Unsullied. "Are you mine?" she asked in Valyrian, her voice clear as a bell. They nodded, their faces stoic. "Then slay the masters," she commanded, and chaos erupted. Drogon, unbound, turned on his would-be captors, his flames reducing the good masters to ash. The Unsullied, with lethal precision, cut down the slavers their spears, a forest of death. Daenerys stood amidst the carnage, her dragons circling above. "You are free," she told the Unsullied, offering them a choice. To a man, they chose to follow her not as slaves but as warriors. Astapor was hers, its chains broken, its plaza stained with the blood of tyrants. In Yunkai, Daenerys faced the wise masters who hid behind their slave soldiers and mercenaries. With cunning diplomacy, she met with the Second Sons, a sellsword company, and swayed their captain, Daario Naharis, with her vision of a world without chains. Daario, charmed by her beauty and resolve, betrayed the masters, leading his men to her side. The younkish slaves, inspired by tales of Astapor, rose against their lords, and the city fell without a siege. The freed slaves, weeping with gratitude, surged around Daenerys, their hands reaching for her. "Misa," they cried, their voices a tide of love. Daenerys, lifted on their shoulders, felt the weight of their faith, a burden and a blessing. Meereen, the greatest of the slaver cities, was her hardest test. Its great masters ruled from the Great Pyramid, their wealth built on the backs of slaves. Daenerys besieged the city, her Unsullied and Dothraki cutting through its defenses. When Meereen fell, she crucified 163 masters, mirroring their cruelty to slave children. But ruling proved more complex than conquering. The Sons of the Harpy, a masked insurgency, struck from the shadows, killing her allies and sowing chaos. Her dragons, now too large to control, became a liability. Drogon burned a child, and Daenerys, heartbroken, chained Rhaegal and Viserion beneath the Great Pyramid, their roars haunting her dreams. Her advisors shaped her reign. Ser Jorah Mormont, her exiled knight, loved her fiercely, though his past betrayal, spying for Robert Baratheon, wounded her deeply. She banished him, only to forgive him. Later, his loyalty unwavering. Missandei, a freed scribe from Narth, became her voice and confidant, her wisdom, a light in dark times. Grey Worm, leader of the Unsullied, embodied her ideals of loyalty, his bond with Missandei, a quiet love that mirrored Daenerys' own heart. When Tyrion Lannister and Varys joined her, their Westerosi cunning offered new strategies, though their loyalty would waver. Daenerys struggled to balance justice with mercy, her heart torn between the liberator she wished to be and the conqueror she was becoming. Her rule in Meereen was tested by external threats. The masters of Yunkai and Astapor regrouped their fleets, besieging the city. Daenerys, captured by a Dothraki Khalasar, faced a new trial. Taken to Vaes, Dothrak, she stood before the Khals, who mocked her as a foreign witch. But Daenerys was no prisoner. She burned their temple, emerging unscathed from the flames, her dragons circling above. The Dothraki knelt, naming her their Khaleesi once more. Meereen was saved when she returned her dragons and army, crushing the Master's fleet. Essos was hers, a continent reshaped by her will. But her eyes turned west to Westeros, the land of her birth where the Iron Throne awaited. Daenerys Targaryen's armada cut through the narrow sea, a fleet of iron and fire bearing the three-headed dragon banner of her house. She stood at the prow of her flagship, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her violet eyes fixed on the horizon. Westeros, the land of her birth, was no longer a dream, but a reality within reach. Her dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, soared above their shadows, dancing on the waves. When she landed at Dragonstone, the island fortress of her ancestors, she knelt on its black sand, her fingers tracing the earth. The air was heavy with salt and memory, and Daenerys felt the weight of her lineage, the ghosts of Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters whispering in the wind. The Iron Throne, stolen by usurpers, was hers to reclaim. But Cersei Lannister, the cunning Queen of King's Landing, stood in her way. Dragonstone was a fortress of obsidian and shadow, its halls carved with dragons that seemed to watch her every move. Daenerys gathered her council, Tyrion, Varys, Missandei, and Grey Worm, and planned her conquest. She would not be a tyrant like her father, she vowed, but a queen of justice, breaking the wheel of oppression. Her first task was forging alliances. The Dornish, led by Ellaria Sand, and the Tyrells under Olenna Redwyn, pledged their banners, their hatred for Cersei, a bond stronger than gold. But the North, ruled by Jon Snow, the king in the North, remained aloof, its people wary of southern wars. Jon arrived at Dragonstone, his cloak dusted with snow, his face etched with the scars of battle. He was a man of few words, his grey eyes carrying the weight of a kingdom. He spoke of a threat beyond the wall, the Night King and his army of the dead, a tide of whites that threatened all life. Daenerys, skeptical, studied him, intrigued by his quiet resolve. "Why should I risk my army for a northern myth?" she asked, her voice sharp. Jon met her gaze unflinching. "Because winter is coming, and it will spare no one." Their negotiations were tense, a dance of pride and necessity, but a spark kindled between them, a connection neither could name. Daenerys allowed Jon to mine dragonglass from Dragonstone's caves, a weapon against the dead. In return, he shared tales of the North of honor and sacrifice, and she found herself drawn to his sincerity. When Tyrion proposed a risky plan to capture a White to prove the threat to Cersei, Jon volunteered to lead the mission. Daenerys, moved by his courage, watched him depart, her heart uneasy. The weight was agonizing, her dreams filled with snow and death. When word came that Jon's party was trapped beyond the wall, she acted without hesitation. Mounting Drogon with Rhaegal and Viserion at her side, she flew north, her dragons a storm of fire against the ice. The battle beyond the wall was a maelstrom of chaos. The Whites swarmed like locusts, their screams a cacophony of death. Drogon and Rhaegal burned swathes of undead, their flames a beacon in the blizzard. Daenerys astride. Drogon saw Jon fighting below his sword, a blur of steel. But the Night King, a spectre of ice, raised his spear, and Viserion fell. His golden scales pierced his roar, fading into silence. Daenerys' heart shattered, but she flew on, rescuing Jon and his men. As they fled, Jon stayed behind, fighting, until he sank beneath a frozen lake. Daenerys, believing him lost, wept. But Jon emerged, saved by his uncle Benjen Stark's sacrifice. At Winterfell, their alliance deepened into love. Jon bent the knee, pledging the North to Daenerys' cause, though his people grumbled. Their nights were stolen moments of warmth, their kisses a defiance of the cold. But the revelation of Jon's true heritage, uncovered by Samwell Tarly and Bran Stark, fractured their bond. Jon was Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark, the true heir to the Iron Throne. Daenerys, who had fought for that throne her entire life, felt betrayal's sting. "You are my queen," Jon said, his voice heavy, but Daenerys saw the truth in his eyes, a rival claimant, a love now tainted by duty. The Battle of Winterfell loomed, and they faced the Night King together, their hearts entwined yet torn. The battle was a crucible of fire and ice. Daenerys rode Drogon her flames, holding back the dead, while Jon fought on the ground, Longclaw flashing in the dark. Sir Jorah died shielding her, his last breath a whisper of her name. The Night King nearly claimed them all, but Arya Stark's dagger ended his reign, shattering the Whites. Victory was bittersweet, the cost measured in blood and loss. Daenerys, standing amidst the ruins of Winterfell, felt the weight of Jon's secret, a shadow that grew with each passing day. Her love for him, once a light, became a torment, and the seeds of tragedy took root. Love epic Game of Thrones tales like this? Want more theories and deep dives into the world of Westeros? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly content that'll keep you hooked. Hit the bell to never miss an upload. Daenerys Targaryen turned her gaze to King's Landing, the final obstacle to her throne. Her army, bolstered by the North Dawn and the Iron Islands, was a tide of steel and fire, but her heart was heavy with loss. The Battle of Winterfell had taken its toll, and Jon's secret that he was Aegon Targaryen, the true heir, gnawed at her. She loved him, But love was a battlefield, and trust was crumbling. Her advisors, once her strength began to falter. Tyrion, haunted by his family's legacy, urged caution, while Varys whispered of Jon's claim, his loyalty shifting like sand. Daenerys, once a beacon of hope, felt the fire in her blood burn unchecked, a legacy of Targaryen madness stirring within. The journey to King's Landing was fraught with peril. Euron, Greyjoy's iron fleet, ambushed her armada, and Rhaegal fell, his emerald scales pierced by scorpions, his body sinking into the sea. Daenerys astride Drogon could only watch her scream, lost in the wind. At Dragonstone, Cersei's forces struck again, capturing Missandei. Daenerys, standing on the cliffs, met Cersei's envoy, but the parley ended in horror. Missandei, chained and defiant, was beheaded before Daenerys' eyes. Her last word, Dracarys, a call to vengeance. Daenerys' heart turned to ash, her grief fueling a rage that no counsel could temper. Jon, torn between his love for Daenerys and his duty to the north, grew distant. His kisses, cold. Tyrion's plans failed. His strategies outmaneuvered by Cersei's ruthlessness. Varys, convinced Jon was the better ruler, plotted to betray Daenerys, but she learned of his treachery. In Dragonstone's war room, she sentenced him to death, her voice steady, but her eyes hollow. Drogon's flames consumed Varys, and Tyrion watched his faith in his queen eroding. Daenerys alone stood on the balcony, her dragons circling above. "I will take what is mine," she whispered with fire and blood. The assault on King's Landing was a storm of fury. Drogon, now a titan of scales and flame, tore through Cersei's defences, his fire melting scorpions and ships alike. The Unsullied and Dothraki breached the gates, their war cries echoing through the streets, the Golden Company. Cersei's hired swords shattered under Daenerys' onslaught. When the bells rang out, signalling surrender, Daenerys paused, her eyes scanning the city below. Tyrion had begged her to spare the innocent, but the ghosts of her losses, Rhaego, Drogo, Viserion, Rhaegal, Missandei, Jorah whispered in her mind. She saw not a city, but a monument to her pain, a world that had taken everything she loved. With a single command, Dracarys, she unleashed hell. Drogon's flames consumed streets, towers and markets, turning King's Landing to ash. Women and children fled their screams, drowned by the roar of fire. The Red Keep crumbled, its stones glowing red, as Cersei and Jaime Lannister perished in its ruins. Daenerys, astride her dragon, was a goddess of wrath, her silver hair a banner in the smoke. The city burned, and with it the last of her mercy. She stood before the Iron Throne, its jagged blades a testament to her victory. Her army gathered in the ruined hall, their faces a mix of awe and fear. Daenerys spoke of a new world free of tyrants, where the wheel of oppression would be broken. But her voice carried a zeal that chilled her allies, a fervour that echoed her father's madness. Tyrion, horrified by the massacre, cast aside, his hands pinned, denouncing her. "You burned a city," he said, his voice breaking. Daenerys, unyielding, ordered his arrest. Jon, his heart torn, confronted her in the throne room, the air heavy with the scent of ash. Daenerys, radiant in her grief, reached for him, believing he would join her vision. "We can build a better world, Jon," she said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. Together, Jon, seeing the madness in her gaze, wept, his love warring with his duty. He kissed her, his lips trembling, then drove a dagger into her heart. Daenerys gasped, her hand clutching his, her violet eyes wide with betrayal. As she fell, her blood pooling on the stone, Drogon's roar shook the heavens. The dragon, sensing his mother's death, entered the hall, his eyes blazing with grief. He did not strike Jon, but turned his fire on the Iron Throne, melting it into slag, a symbol of the cycle Daenerys had sought to break. With a mournful cry, Drogon lifted her body in his claws and flew eastward toward Volantis, leaving Westeros in chaos. In the wake of Daenerys Targaryen's death, a whisper spread among Game of Thrones fans, a theory born from a fleeting image, a rumoured deleted scene from Season 8. The grainy frame showed Daenerys before the attack on King's Landing. her hand resting on a faint swell in her belly, a silent testament to a secret lost in the chaos of her fall. If true, she carried Jon Snow's child, a life conceived in the stolen moments of their love at Winterfell. The child born of two Targaryens, Daenerys, the unburnt mother of dragons, immune to fire and bonded to beasts of legend, and Jon, the resurrected warrior dragon rider and heir to the Iron Throne, would be a force unlike any Westeros had seen, a union of fire and ice that could reshape the world. Drogon, bound to Daenerys by a bond deeper than flesh, did not abandon her. His wings, black as midnight, carried her body across the narrow sea, the wind howling with his grief. He flew to Volantis, the ancient city of fire and faith, where the temple of the Lord of Light stood, its flames burning eternal in defiance of the dark. The Red Priestesses, devotees of R'hllor, sensed the power in Daenerys' blood, a spark of divinity that lingered even in death. They met Drogon at the temple's gates, unafraid of his molten gaze, and bore Daenerys' body to a stone altar carved with runes of old Valyria. The air was thick with incense and the hum of chants, a symphony of fire and shadow. The priestesses, led by a high priestess named Jaya, performed a ritual steeped in blood and fire, their voices rising like a tide. They called upon R'hllor, the Lord of Light, whose power had once brought Jon Snow back from death. Torches flared, and the altar glowed with an unnatural heat. The ritual was a desperate act, a plea to restore the mother of dragons, the woman they believed was Azor Ahai, reborn. But Daenerys' soul had crossed the veil, her spirit beyond their reach. Jia, her eyes glowing with the fire's reflection, sensed another life, faint but fierce, within Daenerys' womb. The child, a boy, was still alive, his heartbeat a drum against the silence of death. The priestesses worked through the night, their chants weaving a spell that defied nature. They cut Daenerys' body, their blades guided by visions, and drew forth the child, his tiny form slick with blood and fire. He did not cry, but his eyes violet as his mother's opened, and the flames around him danced higher, as if R'hllor himself bore witness. The priestesses named him Aegon, after the conqueror who forged the Seven Kingdoms and bathed him in sacred oils, their hands trembling with awe. Drogon, curled around the temple's spires, roared his cry, a hymn to the boy's birth. The dragon's loyalty passed to Aegon, a bond forged in the crucible of his mother's death. Aegon's birth was a miracle, but it was also a spark that would ignite a new war. The priestesses raised him in the temple, their halls, a fortress of faith and flame. They told him of Daenerys, the queen who freed slaves and rode dragons, betrayed by those she trusted, murdered by the man she loved. They spoke of Jon Snow, the traitor who plunged a dagger into her heart, and Aegon's young mind absorbed their words like kindling. The temple's walls were adorned with tapestries of dragons and fire, and Aegon grew surrounded by visions of his mother's glory. The priestesses saw in him the prince that was promised a savior or destroyer. But Aegon cared only for vengeance, his heart a furnace stoked by their tales. Drogon became his guardian, the dragon's presence a constant reminder of his heritage. The priestesses taught Aegon the lore of the Lord of Light, the secrets of fire and shadow, and he listened, his mind sharp as Valyrian steel. He was a child of prophecy, carrying the blood of fire and ice, his existence a challenge to the gods themselves. The temple's flames burned brighter in his presence, and the priestesses whispered that he was more than human, a vessel for R'hllor's will. Aegon's birth was a secret known only to the temple, but its ripples would soon reach Westeros, a tide of fire that would consume all in its path. Aegon Targaryen grew in the shadow of Volantis' red temple, a boy marked by destiny, his life a tapestry of fire and vengeance. The priestesses of R'hllor raised him as a prince, their voices weaving tales of his mother Daenerys, the mother of dragons who freed continents and rode beasts of legend. They spoke of her betrayal of the man who swore love, yet plunged a dagger into her heart. Jon Snow, the name a curse in Aegon's ears. Each story was a stone in the fortress of his rage, each prayer a spark in the furnace of his hatred. The temple's walls adorned with tapestries of dragons and flames were his cradle, and Aegon's heart beat to the rhythm of retribution. Aegon was no ordinary child. He inherited his mother's immunity to fire, a gift revealed when at 5 he walked through a ritual pyre unscathed, the flames parting like a lover's embrace. The priestesses gasped their faith in, law confirmed, and Drogon, perched on the temple's spires, roared in approval. Aegon's father's prowess in battle shone in his training. By 10, he wielded a sword with a grace that belied his years, his movements swift and deadly. At 16, he was a vision of Targaryen glory, silver hair flowing like a river, violet eyes piercing as Valyrian steel, his presence commanding awe and fear. His armor, forged in Volantis's finest forges, was black as night, chased with dragon motifs that gleamed in the firelight. Drogon, now a behemoth whose wings blotted out the sun, became Aegon's steed, their bond forged in the crucible of his mother's death. The dragon, once Daenerys' heart, now answered to Aegon, his roars a symphony of power. Aegon learned to ride him, soaring above Volantis' spires, the city trembling at the sight of a dragon rider reborn. The priestesses taught him the lore of the Lord of Light, the secrets of fire and shadow, and he absorbed their teachings, his mind sharp and hungry. They spoke of the prince that was promised a savior or destroyer, but Aegon cared little for prophecy. His heart sought only vengeance, a single name burning in his soul: Jon Snow. The temple was a fortress, its halls guarded by zealots who saw Aegon as a god. But Volantis was a city of factions, and whispers of the Dragon Boy reached its rulers, the Triarchs. Some sought to use him, others to destroy him, fearing a new Targaryen conquest. Aegon, guided by Gia, the High Priestess, moved in secret, his existence a myth to the outside world. By 18, he was ready to claim his destiny. He gathered an army zealots of Ahalor, their eyes glowing with fanaticism, exiled knights from Westeros drawn by tales of a new dragon lord, and remnants of Daenerys' Dothraki and Unsullied, who had scattered after her death, but rallied to her son's banner. His fleet, built in Volantis' shipyards, flew the three-headed dragon on a field of black, a symbol of fire and blood. Aegon's campaign began with a single act of defiance. He flew Drogon over Volantis' black wall, the fortress of the old blood, and burned its gates, declaring his intent to the world. The Triarchs, cowed by his power, dared not oppose him. His army sailed for Westeros, landing at Storm's End, the ancient seat of House Baratheon. The castle fell without a siege, its lord bending the knee to the dragon rider. From there, Aegon struck at the Vale, and the Riverlands, his dragonfire reducing strongholds to ash. The lords of Westeros, fractured after Daenerys' death, were unprepared for a new Targaryen. Some swore fealty, hoping to survive. Others burned their defiance, a fleeting spark against Drogon's flames. Aegon's heart, however, was fixed on a single target: Jon Snow, the traitor who killed his mother. The priestesses had learned of Jon's exile beyond the wall, living among the free folk. A broken man haunted by his past, Aegon's scouts tracked him, their reports fueling his rage. He dreamed of facing Jon, of seeing the fear in his eyes, as Drogon's fire consumed him. The Seven Kingdoms trembled as Aegon's army marched north, a tide of fire and steel. The North, still loyal to the Starks, rallied against him, but Aegon cared nothing for their banners. His war was personal, a son's vengeance for a mother's death, and no force in Westeros could stand against the wrath of a dragon. Jon Snow, once the hero of Winterfell, now a wanderer beyond the wall, bore the weight of his choices like a chain. The memory of Daenerys Targaryen's death haunted him, her blood on his hands, a stain that no snow could wash away. He lived among the free folk, their camp, a scattering of tents and fires in the haunted forest, their laughter, a faint echo of the life he had lost. Tormund Giantsbane, his friend and ally, tried to draw him into their revels, but Jon's heart was elsewhere, lost in the ashes of King's Landing. His grey eyes, once bright with purpose, were shadowed, his dreams plagued by visions of fire and betrayal. Yet Jon's mind was restless, stirred by a new mystery. Strange visions had begun to haunt him, flashes of a faceless figure, a voice whispering of a darkness older than the White Walkers. He called it the No One, a name drawn from tales of the faceless men. But its nature was unclear. Scrolls from Castle Black, salvaged before its fall, spoke of a force that fed on chaos, a shadow that thrived on broken oaths and spilled blood. The free folk whispered of a presence in the forest, a chill that lingered even in summer. Jon, driven by a need to atone for Daenerys' death, sought answers, believing this threat could eclipse the Night King's terror. His search led him deep into the haunted forest, where the air was thick with frost and secrets. He found carvings on weirwood trees, symbols that pulsed with an unnatural light, circles within circles, eyes without faces. The carvings were ancient, predating the first men, and Jon felt their weight, a warning of something vast and unyielding. He consulted Val, a wildling seer who spoke of a force that watched from the void, neither living nor dead. "It's older than the wall," she said, her voice low. "It feeds on vengeance, on pain. Be careful, Jon Snow, lest you call it forth." Jon, undeterred, continued his search, his nights spent poring over fragments of lore, his days tracking the forest's hidden paths. Unbeknownst to Jon, his past was racing to meet him. Aegon Targaryen, the son he never knew, had landed in Westeros, his army carving a path of fire through the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon, raised in Volantis' Red Temple, was a warrior of 18, his silver hair and violet eyes a mirror of his mother's. He rode Drogon, the black dragon whose wings cast shadows over mountains, and his heart burned with a single purpose: to kill Jon Snow, the man who murdered Daenerys. The priestesses had fed his rage their tales, painting Jon as a monster, a traitor who snuffed out the light of the world. Aegon's scouts tracked Jon to the lands beyond the wall, their reports fueling his obsession. He dreamed of facing Jon, of seeing the fear in his eyes as Drogon's fire consumed him. On a moonless night, as snow fell like ash, the haunted forest erupted in chaos. Drogon's roar shattered the silence, a sound that shook the earth and woke the stars. His wings, vast as storm clouds, cast a shadow over the free folk's camp, and panic spread like wildfire. Tormund rallied the warriors, but their spears were no match for a dragon. The camp dissolved into chaos, tents, collapsing fires, scattering embers into the snow. Jon, standing alone in a clearing, gripped Longclaw, its Valyrian steel glinting in the firelight. He knew this was no wildling raid, no ordinary foe. The air grew heavy, the scent of brimstone sharp, and Jon's heart pounded with a dread he could not name. Aegon descended, dismounting from Drogon with a grace that belied his fury. He was clad in black armor, chased with dragon motifs, his silver hair gleaming like a beacon. His violet eyes burned with a hatred so pure it seemed to sear the air, his face a twisted echo of Daenerys' beauty. "You killed her!" He spat, his voice a blade trembling with years of pent-up rage. "You killed my mother, Daenerys Targaryen." Jon, seeing the boy's Targaryen features, felt a jolt of recognition, a truth dawning too late. Daenerys had borne his child a son he had never known. The weight of it staggered him, his sword lowering as his mind raced. "Aegon," Jon said, his voice hoarse, barely audible over the wind. "Listen to me. I loved her. I never wanted to." But Aegon's heart, forged in the crucible of Volantis, had no room for doubt. The priestess's tales had painted Jon as a monster, a traitor whose blade ended the hope of the world. Aegon's hand trembled not with fear, but with the intensity of his hatred. "Liar," he roared, his voice breaking. "You swore to serve her, and you betrayed her. You took everything." Jon tried again, stepping forward, his hands raised in supplication. "I killed her to save lives, to stop a war. She was my queen, my love. I had no choice." But Aegon's rage drowned him out, a tide that swept away reason. Aegon raised his hand, and Drogon's jaws opened, a furnace of flame ready to consume Jon. Desperate, shouted one last plea. "You're my son! Aegon, don't do this!" But the words were lost in the dragon's roar. Aegon's eyes, wet with tears of fury, never wavered. "Dracarys," he commanded, and the world turned to fire. Drogon's flames engulfed Jon, a torrent that melted snow and charred earth. Jon's screams were brief, swallowed by the inferno, his body reduced to ash in moments. Longclaw fell its blade, sinking into the snow, a silent witness to the tragedy. As the flames died, Aegon stood over the blackened ground, his chest heaving, his victory hollow. He had avenged his mother, but the weight of his act pressed against him, a shadow he could not name. Then from the darkness, something stirred. Jon's remains, scattered in the snow, twitched an unnatural movement that chilled the air. His eyes, or what should have been ash, opened, glowing an eerie white, like those of a White Walker. The light was not of life, but of something older, colder, a power that had claimed him in death. Aegon froze his breath, catching the sight, a dagger to his soul. The forest fell silent, the air heavy with an unnatural chill. From the shadows a figure emerged, a formless silhouette, its face a void, its presence a weight that crushed hope. The No One, the enigma. Jon had sought stood before Aegon, its gaze a promise of ruin. No words were spoken, but its eyes, empty yet all-seeing, bore into Aegon, as if marking him for a fate worse than death. The stars dimmed, the wind grew still, and a shadow spread, whispering of a reckoning that would engulf Westeros in eternal night. Aegon, alone in the clearing, felt the weight of his vengeance, a chain he could not break. He had killed his father, but in doing so, he had awakened a darkness that would haunt the world, a force no dragon could burn. Did this tale of fire and shadow grip your soul? Want to dive deeper into Game of Thrones mysteries and epic sagas? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly theories, lore, and more. Hit the bell to join our Westeros journey.